The following video will spoil the entirety of Made in Abyss, as it exists up to the ending of the second season of the anime. It will feature horror and nightmarish visuals not fit for those who are not above the age of 17 or capable of distinguishing reality from fiction. My audio quality and the quality of the editing will likely differ from what you expect in negative ways due to my current living arrangements, and it will not in any way receive a part 2 or further explanation once further story elements have been released. That said, I urge you not to click away. Even if through shock and terror you must trudge on through clenched fists, even if you must spoil everything so that you can understand the gravity of the journey you take when you enter this world, I ask you not to avert your gaze. For if you do, even for a moment, no good can come of the tale which I am about to relay. In this world, one careless mistake can cost you everything. Take a moment, if you must, to prepare yourself, and step forth. Welcome to the Abyss. To say that Made in Abyss has had a profound impact on me throughout its run would be a profound understatement. And with its second season now completed, and the ending of the story likely not far off in the grand scheme of things, I can confidently tell you now that I don't need to see how it ends to tell you that Made in Abyss, Golden City of the Scorching Sun, is a masterpiece. From the very beginning, Made in Abyss and myself have progressed together at a similar pace. After going through one of the most horrific life-altering terrors I've ever experienced, Made in Abyss found its way into my life precisely when it needed to, luring me into a world I could enjoy, escape to, and explore, tricking me with its art and world building into ignoring each of its many warning signs which threatened heartache was an inevitability, and that no good could come from venturing into what the inhabitants of the city of Orth refer to as the gateway to the Netherworld, or rather the Netherworld itself. The series' first season is an incredible story in its own right, but as an allegory for the dangers of real caving and the indescribable call to explore the forbidden depths, it shines brighter than anything else in its genre, capturing and beautifully balancing the dangers of the abyss with how its main characters view it. As an audience member, you become Rico, excited and in awe of the world of the abyss, and goodness does this series take its sweet time before letting us actually see any of it. We're given just hints enough to want to explore it, but then constantly teased, only seeing what Rico sees, desperately clawing onto any new information we can get about this seemingly bottomless pit. The allure is universal. After all, who hasn't come across a big hole in the ground and dropped a rock in just to see how deep it really goes? But we're forgetting something here, aren't we? Because for all the bright colors and young-looking characters, rather beyond the RPG fantasy chibi style, Made in Abyss has been showing and telling quite a lot about itself, specifically how gruesome its monsters can be, and about how little value is placed in the lives and lived experiences of children. A lot of people tend to forget that Made in Abyss isn't Happy Tree Friends or Sausage Party. It's been very honest about what is off the table, or more accurately, what isn't off the table when it comes to children. Vomiting, emotional abuse, intentional and forced starvation, public humiliation via nudity, torture, unpaid labor, and the loss of one's own humanity. All of these things are made clear as parts of life, and nobody in this universe is doing anything about that, or even seems to view it as wrong. This is something a lot of people point fingers at and call problematic, because they don't agree with the worldviews presented therein. To justify these depictions would be to walk on very thin ice, so allow me to preface this by saying that I don't enjoy watching the children suffer like this. But while I did once view these depictions as toxic, problematic, and exploitative for shock value, it's something that you just have to acknowledge as part of the abyss if you're going to get anything out of this story. And trust me when I say that however dark it may be, there is something to get out of it. What's to be gleaned from this, and what becomes increasingly apparent as we sink deeper into the abyss, is that those who challenge the abyss are very quick to resort to child abuse in order to learn more about it. Keep that in mind, all those of you who couldn't wait to see Rico and Reg enter the abyss together, knowing full well how old they are and what they were getting into. The signs were there all along. The abyss attracts a certain demographic, and that demographic isn't exactly the most empathetic type. Looking closer at those who choose this life willingly, aside from one or two standout cases, that becomes incredibly clear. That is to say that when Season 2 opens with a girl being abused in every conceivable way by a disgusting man who owns her for a sex slave, I wasn't surprised or caught off guard by what I saw. It wasn't pleasant, mind you, but it's no worse than what Bondrewd did to Reg or any of the other children in his care for that matter. And that's how we get to understand something crucial about the Abyss and the surrounding town of Orth. If you're going to make a living repeatedly venturing into the mouth of hell, probably going to end up the type of person who deserves to be going there. While the outside world has modern medicine, caring doctors who arrive via caravan, and happy, loving families, no doubt, those aren't the kind of people to be drawn into the Abyss. The people of Orth know only the Great Pit. Its gifts they keep as treasures, its victims they worship as fallen heroes. We've known all along that the citizens of Orth weren't the first to build a civilization on the edge of the Great Pit, because we never see any of them respected in such a way as to pray to it when they die, like the skeletons do. In fact, not one of them is doing anything other than abusing the natural wonders of the Abyss to make a profit, no matter how much it damages them, or how inhuman they become. But it isn't until Season 2 that we realize that the previous native people of this land were cast out by the arrival of the first residents of Orth, and that not even they could overcome the greed they felt at the pit's discovery. The people here are all problematic, pathetic, primitive evildoers with ulterior motives. The only innocents are the children, and in this society, the children are viewed as nothing more than lab rats and tools to achieve the adults' goals. But none of that really clicked for me until toward the end of Season 2. Even the original native tribe viewed children as population increase tools, branding Irumyui as useless, and sacrificing her to the Abyss because she could not become pregnant. While they offered respect to the Great Pit, they were just as vile and filthy as every other foolish one who called themselves human, approaching a hell they could never hope to comprehend, and acting surprised when it turns out to be just that. A hell. One beyond words and beyond imagination. Finally, I feel like I understand the Abyss and what it means, what the curse is, and everything the series has been trying to say over the course of the movie, the first season, and now concluded with the jaw-dropping finale of Season 2. And while I could easily go into detail explaining each connected piece, like how the reason Bondrewd's cartridges require love to work is due to the existence of absolute value, or how Nanachi became a sentient hollow while Midi became a flesh pile of suffering when she was lifted due to that same transference of value, or even that the star compass getting dropped so early on attests to it fulfilling its purpose as a lure into the Abyss, and that whoever finds it next will be caught in the same trap Rico was. But instead, it would be much easier to just explain just through an analysis of Season 2 itself, made as brief and concise as I can possibly make it. But we won't need Rico, Reg, or Nanachi just yet. Instead, the easiest way to explain what's happening now, and what makes it so profound, is to start with the victim girl who's pictured so prominently in Season 2, Episode 1, and the group of outcasts with whom she makes her journey into hell. One of the first things to catch my eye in Season 2 was the way it bravely shifted focus away from Reg, Rico, and Nanachi. After waiting so long for a continuation, and suffering through the relentless brutality of the movie, I had expected to continue on what would surely be the end of the series, and I expected the encounter with Bondrewd to be a bewildering stumble in that path, one that I could overlook if only I could see the bottom of the Neverworld. As such, my first moments with Maiden Abyss, Golden City of the Scorching Sun, went a little something like this. That's interesting. I hope these guys don't stop us from making progress. Hold on to that thought, it will become important in just a moment. Now, each of these people, in some way or another, is considered an outcast in some way, and while I'm aware that the manga goes into their personal lives just a bit more than the anime does, I'm going to put my trust in the anime, since the anime decided to make a lot of changes that I personally agree with, and the anime has Kevin Penkin, who is a good enough composer that he almost got me to watch Shield Hero Season 2, and if he has that much power in a bad anime, just take a moment and realize how much power he has in a good one. And anyway, it isn't long before this band of explorers reaches the depths of the 6th layer, of what I'm assuming will be around 10 layers total in the end. Their goal was to find and take the spoils of the so-called Golden City, which supposedly resides at the bottom of the Great Pit, and deciding this hostile desert is the Golden City of legend, the group sets up camp, with Vleko remarking cryptically that though they were each outcasts in their original homes, this environment was far less hospitable. Of course, this is the point where food becomes a serious issue, and where one careless mistake can lead to suffering and turmoil for the entire group, which is exactly what happens. While it's worth noting that there are man-made structures showcased around, almost hinting that there was at least at one point a golden city or some such thing, it has all long since been all but forgotten. The existence of the interference units also seems to serve this point, as well as the transport pod through the sea of corpses. But that's something that is admittedly just interesting to point out and not really relevant to the overall discussion at this point. Desperate for answers and equally desperate to quell the suffering of his team, Wazakyan, that's this person here by the way, Vleko, this red-haired girl, and Belaf, the Dr. Stone reject with the blue eyes, embark on a quest to find, of all things, water. Of course, the only option they have happens to contain, or perhaps be in and of itself, a parasite, which turns men and women to stone, forces an eggy, transparent diarrhea out of them, and slowly, torturously robs them of any will to live. They need water to live, but this organism, even after being boiled, survives. In fact, as a personal theory, I believe the hotter the water, the healthier the organism, as evidenced by a line about a nearby pool so hot that not even the interference units could get near it safely. Poisoned water which only makes you more thirsty, hellish fates beyond comprehension. It very well may be that the pit is hell itself, and given what occurs next for the pitiful band of explorers, it's easy to come to such a conclusion. The egg. A relic not to be touched by human hands directly. According to the interference units, unwieldy in the hands of any adult, as adults are too complex a breed. If it is to be used, they remark, as best they seem to be able, it has to be by the hand of a child, else the results would be ghastly, and the dream would be closer to a nightmare. The wish-granting egg merely alters biology, same as any artifact found within the Abyss. It has powers not based in magic, but impossible chemistry. However the child chooses to wish, her genetic code will be altered. At least, that's my understanding of it. Even the interference units seem to have some difficulty describing it, but from their confused and garbled words we can glean at least the following.
丸い異物は願いの形。ささやかなものから強いものまで、それとても強いもの。君たち風に言うと、願いを叶える卵だ。人の生態は雑多で複雑、適していない。使わせるなら様態がいい。In order to understand exactly why this was a very unfortunate decision to give Irumyui the egg, we need to take a look back and understand who Irumyui is as a character, child or no. We know that her mother smelled constantly of sex. I assume I don't need to explain what that scent is, and if I do, you're too young for this video, and it's time for you to leave before you get scarred for life. Childbearing was the ultimate responsibility, and each female of the village was, I assume, required to mate and give birth repeatedly until they could not any longer. So according to Irumyui's account, her mother had a great number of mates, and produced a great number of offspring, of which Irumyui was the only female. As such, she was treated with unending kindness. She was to bear the next of kin, after all. Once she was found to be infertile, though, all of that kindness ceased. A child whose adopted family is dying. A child who is dying herself of illness. In desperation, Vleko strikes a deal to give Irumyui the wish-granting egg, believing that the wish of the child would be to rescue everyone. However, as the days continue to go by and the bodies drop like flies, it becomes clear that Irumyui did no such thing. Her body morphs and molds until, at last, it becomes clear Irumyui has become fertile enough to make a child of her own, without having to mate with anyone at all. One by one, this bloated mass of suffering births inhuman beasts, each cursed to be born only to suffer and die. The creature that was once Irumyui becomes more and more inhuman with each new birth, as the sickness of the parasite overtakes the entire party of explorers, forcing them to crave water which will only make the sickness worse. There is, however, one exception: the divine prophet himself, Wazakyan.
Wazakyan isn't exactly an evil man, but he is a decidedly less than empathetic individual to say the least. Having watched his entire group fall horrifically ill, even his most trusted cohort Belaf, Wazakyan suddenly uncovers the truth. And suspiciously, some of those affected by the diarrhea parasite begin to make swift recoveries, the first among them being Veiko herself. While any one of us might think him horrible for doing this, Wazakyan's only real goal is to save his ragtag group of adventurers, whatever gruesome tactics he must resort to in order to make that happen. So when the cure manifests itself from within Irumyui's children, he begins to forcefully take them from her, one by one, commenting in fact that the live ones seem to have a much higher nutritional value and repel the illness much quicker. Even if he'd personally prefer to let them stay together, mother and child, duty compels him to steal Irumyui's children from her and cut them into a stew for the remaining members of the group. This is the beginning of what Made in Abyss will come to define as the unforgivable sin. But don't worry, it's going to get a lot worse before things get any better. As Veiko weakens due to illness, Wazakyan has the interference robots search mostly in vain for one more of the supposed wish-granting eggs, using what little inventory he does obtain to only further worsen Irumyui's grotesque transformation. Soon, she becomes as tall as a building, and in the show's own words,
皆が地獄に慣れた頃、Irumyuiは叫ぶことをやめていた。
The man was vile enough to repeatedly take advantage of a child's prayer for acceptance, rob her of her only happiness, and cook it and eat it for the sake of others. Just like every other resident of the Abyss, using research and science as a sort of excuse to justify immorality, he casts his humanity aside not for the sake of the child, but to forsake her, all under the guise of false worship, respect, and choosing not to waste the corpses of her children. It is in these moments that we understand that there can indeed be no turning back from the ghastly tradition set in place by Wazakyan's selfishness and hopeless desires to bend the rules of the Abyss around him. His unquenchable thirst to stay alive. Of course, in this world, energy is of the essence regardless of the form, and as Irumyui's humanity drains further, she retreats to a place where the curse is at its fullest in order to take advantage of the plentiful wildlife which exists there. The small band of survivors follow their new god, which they now call their queen, and as we reach the secret place closest to the center of the Abyss, Irumyui's final transformation occurs. Horrified at having taken advantage of the birthed young of another he once called a friend, Belaf demands, through surging tears, that Irumyui consume him, that she take back the energy he stole from her. If nothing else, he laments, he cannot continue to live as a human being, as one retaining that state of innocence called humanity, after knowingly consuming the children of another. And as this poor, wretched soul walks forth into the massive gaping hole from which Irumyui once birthed a life that was cursed to an early grave, scarred and widened from the continuous acts of creation, the first of the hollows is finally made. It is no mere coincidence that the strange town Riko, Reg, and Nanachi wind up in seems to be made entirely of flesh, nor is it an oversight that the curse does not affect them within its walls. The living toilet which consumes their waste, the food which is harvested from organic wall tissue, the ornamental bones which hang near the entrance, and most importantly, the lack of monstrous invaders within. The village of the Hollows, as we know it in the anime, is not a village at all, but a massive living organism, the remains of Irumyui, still birthing creatures as misshapen rabbits and docile life meant to mimic the pet rabbit Irumyui had before. Her wish was a combination of things, but the loudest of all her requests was simply to fulfill the happiness she had lost. How could poor Irumyui have known? How savagely her body would be distorted in the process. How painful an experience it must have been. To live through such a hell that your voice gives out. To be so used to the constant pain of childbirth, that the orifice for doing so deforms into a gateway larger than her entire face. A gateway big enough to enter into, where inside value is absolute according to the laws of this living, breathing organism. Yet through all of this hell, Wazakyan smiles. He has led a successful venture all this time, after all. He has a god to procure his premonitions from, a home to live in, and a theoretically infinite source of food. Veiko trembles at the sight of him, this being who was once a man, who understood that to survive in hell, one must become as the creatures that dwell within, a devil. Overcome by grief, the only remaining moral compass attempts to end her own life. But of course, being connected to Irumyui's wish, if Veiko were to die, so too would Wazakyan's precious queen, and as such, the man who is now anything but, foils her attempt with inhuman strength, a strength gained by using the power of the wishing egg, the divine inspiration of hell, on himself. Wazakyan has finally abandoned his humanity.
きっと大穴は呼び続けるはずさ。これからもずっと先も憧れに挑み続ける者たちを。
何の話をしているの？予言？
希望さ。
One by one, each and every member of this cursed society steps through the veil of protection, to be overtaken by Irumyui's value system. We see it in gracefully minimal detail, but are told outright that this is what has occurred by none other than Veiko herself. Veiko, now existing only to be a life support system for the village queen, is locked away within Irumyui's brain, surrounded by the souls of each of the children she has lost. The system continuously gives birth anew, and the now inhuman hollows of the village, who entered without permission, yet again under the guise of worship, partake forcefully of Irumyui's flesh and embryos without permission or remorse. Though she has long since lost her ability to communicate through words, it is easy to reach the conclusion that for Irumyui, this existence has been suffering on an unprecedented scale. And yet, those who were never meant to benefit from her wish at all continue to defile her body from the inside against her will, with the man she most feared now having benefited from her suffering most of all. How could any end, pictured or otherwise, be so brutal and horrific as this? As Veiko sits in the prison Wazakyan trapped her in, contemplating the sins of her life until now, she offers solace to the now eldritch Irumyui as best she is able, singing to and comforting the poor souls of Irumyui's forsaken stillborns and murdered children, the same souls who enact vengeance on all those who break the unwritten commandments of this fleshy purgatory that they constantly abuse. These creatures, so lovingly named one by Veiko in the darkness, are the judges of value. Whether a system of Irumyui's own design, or simply a construct of the abyss and side effect of the wish-granting egg, I know not. But I do know that the value of said system is more than simply its namesake. In Dawn of the Deep Soul specifically, for as many questions as it raises, the concept of value among loved ones is repeatedly shown, if never truly explained. It is why, as I mentioned earlier, the lift system Bonjuru designed actually works. It is why Prushka became a white whistle and why her soul still lingers within the stone. Why Fapta, a character we'll discuss momentarily, demands that the stone be purified by those within the city of Irumyui's flesh. But through all of these now explainable mysteries, solved by the value, its most profound description is that which comes from the now inhuman, Leviathan-esque Belaf at the end of the season.
憧れも汚れも喜びも痛みも私は捨ててしまった。君は拾い宿してゆけ。拾うものすべてが君の価値だ。
Value in and of itself, beyond a convoluted trading system used in place of a currency within the Lovecraftian town, is a universal law of equivalent exchange and justice, upheld without mercy by the Abyss itself. This alone warrants it being called an interesting development for the story, given how much it explains and makes sense of. But even beyond that, the fact that the villagers have done as their prophet once commanded, and cast aside riches or gold in search of that which has greater value, only to now be doing business with value itself as an essence. That is brilliant storytelling and incredibly profound. It makes the societies of the world above seem so inaccessible, so irrelevant, that their currencies are worthless this far down, that for all the power money holds, it cannot influence a world this far beyond its reach, this deep in the abyss. Needless to say, while on first viewing I found this concept forced and convoluted, I now feel such a level of understanding of this system and why it exists, that everything else feels primitive. There is a sense that the world and the society within it existed for more than just to be visited by our main cast of characters, though of course it is prophetic that Reg should be among these three, now that he has found what he considers to be his haka, or item of absolute value. In this pulsating hell, somehow these people have found hope and happiness, or at least content, and a degree of normalcy in the bizarre and twisted lives they live, but at the immeasurably painful cost of a living organism they leech off of like parasitic mites. They have spent so long taking advantage of Irumyui's body that they no longer even fully realize that they are doing it. But Irumyui, as we see toward the end, is very much alive, and the wishing egg she retrieved from Wazukyan as recompense is all that she needed to make her final wish come true. According to the account of Weiko, Irumyui raised her final child in secret within the egg, until finally giving birth beyond the veil of no return. The villagers, being unable to leave, could only watch as their god birthed a wild, savage princess, a being they could never interact with, who could not enter the village, for it is forbidden once born to return to the mother's womb. This was Irumyui's final wish. This was Irumyui's final child. Weiko, for any number of reasons, recounts this story with joy. Irumyui's final child, you see, was created as a response to the constant ravagement and defilement of her own flesh and blood. This cursed thing, this beautiful, terrible creature, with its red claws and golden eyes. This child would be the new god of the villagers. Faputa, as she would come to be known, was absolute value incarnate from the very moment of her birth. That's when Weiko saw that not one singular moment of Irumyui's suffering had been forgotten or forgiven. The god incarnate, the once human hollows had made, through their selfish gluttony and willingness to make Irumyui to suffer, was not a loving one. And in the many years that passed leading up to the events of Season 2, Faputa never stopped looking for a way in to fulfill her suffering mother's only remaining wish. To enact perfect justice on those who had wronged her, to end the suffering, and become the hell these hollow souls had forgotten about. And once Reg came to know her, the beautiful, wild princess, the time would finally come. Using one of the last remaining blasts from his incinerator, the force field is penetrated. Hell has found its way in. There is no better understanding of the true essence of Lovecraftian horror, I think, than when a world, whose society is already vastly different from our own, in what they view as being right or wrong, worships a god, summons a god, and then realizes that they could never have even begun to understand, from the moment they willingly set foot into the gaping orifice of the suffering they caused, nor from the moment they had set foot in this desert hell, how much their god despised them. With unforgiving red claws and eyes white with rage, the monster they created of their own abuse, the offspring of the child they took such cruel advantage of, will finally seek out its vengeance against them. The day of wrath has come, and none who dwell within are safe from the boiling blood of justice itself. When we first meet Faputa, the beastly princess, who thankfully is no longer quite as explicitly depicted as she was in the manga, it's easy to be hasty in judging her as a character we've seen a million times before, who is merely designed to be marketing material. And while yes, that is a killer design, and Faputa does have occasional moments of cuteness, she is far more than any of those overused tropes that she may appear to be. Having a sort of catchphrase to her speech wasn't something I was sold on until I learned the reason for it, for example. It was Reg, on his journey to find his haka, that of absolute value to him, who taught her that she must always end her sentences with sosu, as it is considered in his society a refined and dignified way to speak. Something that her robotic guardian does admittedly help to teach her, at least the one she doesn't immediately destroy beyond repair in a blind rage. Oh wait, Her drawing that universally comes across as an upside-down stick figure is actually a representation of value itself, which single-handedly justifies everything that makes the first moments of exploration in the new layer so disgusting to watch. It was Faputa who, out of a love for Reg, set out a note denoting the group as Haka, in a way saying, "Do not worry, I will protect you, because you are my everything." A welcome home note that was blatantly misunderstood. The theft of hairs from Rico and Reg, which were then stuffed inside the bodies of freshly killed animals, weren't some sick, perverse game laid out by a near-omnipotent, godlike stalker of this layer, but a way to repel the beasts so dangerous and plentiful that each and every one poses a threat comparable to the Orbed Piercer, or Crimson Splitjaw. Each of these seemingly grotesque and unacceptable actions are completely justified under the culture and harsh environmental dangers of the layer, and Faputa, primal and animalistic as she is, performed each of these actions out of a justified selfless love and will to protect the group. It is not some wildly inappropriate misunderstanding of cultural differences, as is often used as justification for fan service in lesser fantasy stories, but is genuine cultural and societal difference to the extent that once explained, everything that once disgusted you about this twisted greeting becomes not just acceptable in this context, but wholesome. That is something I rarely see in storytelling, and I absolutely have to give it props for being so outlandish and different that it borders on grotesque until you understand why it is the way that it is. It takes a lot to make gory imagery this intense feel like anything other than shock value, but somehow Made in Abyss is able to pull it off in a way that almost makes me want to forgive the deplorable depictions of extreme levels of torture toward children we've seen up until now. I'm not going to forgive it entirely, mostly because it still put the image of Brondrud's bone in my head at some point, and gave me a testimonial from Prushka about the experience of seeing it, but we'll cast that bit of information aside for now, in case I ever decide to make a video about Dawn of the Deep Soul, because I definitely have some words for that movie, and the way it chose to do everything that it did. To get back on topic though, the horrific genocide which occurs as a result of Faputa's vengeful efforts to free her mother's body are gruesome and horrific, but at the same time, understandable and justified. What we're seeing beyond this hate-fueled carnage is an act of justice, equal suffering returned for the abuse of the one the townsfolk live inside and feed off of. It's this incredible moment of moral gray areas where you realize how horrible what's happening is, and that these people, for the most part, were only following their leader. At the same time, their actions were so deplorable that you can't deny that at least most of them deserve what's coming to them. They're only being shown a taste of the suffering they caused, and until this killing is completed, Irumyui can't be free of her suffering at the hands of a relic she never asked for, which she could never have understood. There's obviously more to it than that, but to explain literally everything that makes this massacre so incredibly powerful and moving is to rob you of a life-changingly brutal experience by watching it, one which will change the way you view Lovecraftian horror, as its unthinkable entities enact indescribable horrors whose only escape is into that of madness. This is cemented by Veiko herself, when, in a moment of sheer terrifying understanding, she laments she hasn't yet lost her mind, that there could be no greater punishment than this living hell and being unable to stop comprehending it. Lovecraftian horror often provides its main characters with experiences so vile and horrific, so beyond the realm of science or reality, that it becomes a better fate to lose one's mind than to continue onward in this realm of unending terrors and indescribable blasphemies. That is the essence of Lovecraftian hellscape eldritch horror, and it has been perfectly captured, understood, and recreated in this mind-blowing season of television. In the end, those who understand the error of their ways, those who would gladly do it all again, and those who understand the gravity of the true depths to which they've been forsaken, none of these can escape the depths of hell they have each wrought upon themselves, knowingly or otherwise. Even those who sacrifice themselves to be consumed by the god they only now finally seem to understand. Those lives are given solely as penance for the unforgivable sins of their past. And even knowing that, it brings us no great joy to watch as they die. The building hate in Faputa's heart, the moment she snaps and nearly kills her own Haka, only for that bloodthirst to be used against her own guardian. Each tear, cry, and scream of pain, they all serve to their respective thematic ends, but there is nothing in any of them that could ever account for the level of darkness we've reached, nor possibly prepare us for what will lie ahead. By the end of the season, it becomes perfectly clear that there is no reward for trudging through the bloodied, mud-stained path to the bottom of the Netherworld. There is no light at the end of this tunnel. The bottom of the abyss could only ever be one thing: a cold, damp, empty pit. And it is my opinion that the moment Riko reaches the bottom, she will die, along with Nanachi, Reg, and now Faputa as well. There is nothing down there but darkness and a hell unimaginable. A lot of the reviews I've seen for this series have expressed a surprising level of discontent with the way Season 2 was handled. I've read a lot of extreme comments complaining that Made in Abyss was never that good, come to think of it. The story was ground to a halt in the Golden City of the Scorching Sun, and that the pacing is downright bad compared to previous seasons. Now, if you ask me, these opinions, while valid as any other opinion, are objectively missing the point the second season is trying to make. Throughout Made in Abyss's runtime, the series has done an excellent job of putting the reader in the shoes of Riko herself. That's how, despite numerous warnings, we still seem to be caught off guard to such an extreme degree when, in the first season, the truly horrific visions begin to manifest, and the show becomes less keen to ignore the gory truth of this world, often putting it on full gruesome display. It's so easy to acknowledge hellish tragedy befalling others around us, yet for some reason incomprehensible the moment it happens to someone we know or even to ourselves. The issue I take with the argument that Made in Abyss's pacing has come to a crawl, and that is reason enough to view the modern episodes and the movie as letdowns, is that if y'all would just hold your darn shroom bears for just a few gosh dang seconds, you'd see that what's actually happening here is the story is taking advantage of every scrap of its potential. Potential which, given our proximity to the void-like darkness that surely lurks at the Netherworld's bottom, is something that we should really appreciate while we have the chance. At the beginning of this video, I asked you not to look away, to watch this through to the end, and while I have tried to explain the darkness of the second season, and by extension its brilliance in world building, specifically as it relates to Lovecraftian horror conventions and the concept of a hellish purgatory punishing unfairness in the most brutalistic way possible, I'm sure that for some of you, my explanation of this hollow hellscape still doesn't explain much that you didn't already know. After all, not knowing is so much of the appeal. However, if you are one of those who believes Season 2 was quote-unquote ruined by poor pacing, may I simply take the time to ask you when else in the Abyss an opportunity to explore such a unique culture will present itself? There were numerous moments in the Abyss that the show makes clear are points of no return, and now, knowing what exactly the town we uncovered was, and seeing the progression each of our characters have made through it, when we consider that beyond this point, it's highly likely the Abyss is nothing but darkness and fleshy walls pulsating with hellish undulations of all kinds. Was it really that much of a waste of time? If you ask me, it wasn't wasted time at all. The most powerful lesson Season 2 of Made in Abyss taught me is the importance of patiently slowing down and appreciating something as though it's the last time you'll ever see it. The first and only balloon capable of reaching the surface was a reminder of a luxury now lost, a possibility to communicate that is no longer feasible for any of us at this depth. From this point on, as Waco so clearly and grotesquely reminds us, the slightest desire to turn back will mean the instantaneous end of everything that makes us human. And knowing the cruelties and horrors of this world, that even a treasure which can grant wishes is nothing but a catalyst for prolonged torturous life, as one consumed by the mouth of hell, I don't need to know where we're going to understand that where we've been has been masterful. And that whatever it is, it could never outweigh the sacrifices it cost on the road to get here. There is not going to be a happy ending to this story. And knowing that nothing lies below us but darkness, and that things are only ever going to get worse, is there really such a problem with enjoying a time with a life form that has sentience, even if they are wretched in their circumstances? Of this much I can promise you, even without knowing what lies beyond the next layer. Made in Abyss is a journey into hell beyond words. It isn't an uplifting tale, but among the most powerful reenactments of the moment you realize that in your pursuit of curiosity, your drive to discover how deep you could delve into the gaping maw of the earth, you have reached a point of no return. You may find something worth seeing here. You may not. But there comes a point where you realize you're stuck. That this earth which surrounds you with rock and darkness is a tomb, and that you have sealed your own fate in the jaws of an uncaring, unknowable hell. A hell beyond words. That is when the human side of you finally realizes it. It could never be worth it, but there's nothing left you can do. Nothing but to keep venturing into the infinite darkness, to continue trudging forward, unable to look away from the hell you willingly set foot into. This regret, this homesickness for what you could never have, this is the true curse. This is the curse of the Abyss.